Welcome everybody to today's Lake Norman Chamber of Commerce Special Focus Friday on Transportation. I'm Bill Russell, and we're very excited to bring this program to you. It is presented by Novant Health Huntersville Medical Center. I have my public policy chair, Jeff Tart, on the line. And Jeff and I were at town hall last night to 10:15. It's been a long couple of days for us. But anyway, Jeff, welcome. And if you could kind of introduce our speakers. I know we have Janet on the line. If you could introduce Janet, who's going to introduce our panel.
All right, I appreciate it. Welcome everybody on this Friday morning. Actually, I guess we get a long weekend this weekend. Janet, it is an absolute pleasure to have you with us. You will have quite a panel and group with you. As I understand, you're really an economic development expert guru, and appreciate all the work you've put in over the years. I believe you spent a lot of time in the Southwest and the Northwest, both in the Tucson, Phoenix area, as well as Portland. So those are thriving metropolitan areas that are doing great things. I've been to all three cities. They're marvelous to visit, quite robust business environments. And I think you're responsible for making a lot of that happen. So with that, we welcome you today and turn the floor to you.
Thank you so much, Senator Tart. I have enjoyed working in those markets, but I'm so excited to be in the Charlotte region and bring my expertise and have my team here really working in service to all of you here in our community. So Senator Tart, especially too, we appreciate all you have done in service in leading our community and our state. So thanks for inviting us here. Bill, thank you so much. It is great to be with you. You are an institution in this region. You have welcomed me and you have helped onboard me into the community. I can remember one of our first lunches over at Hello Sailor. So I'm so grateful to you and appreciate the time this morning. Thank you also to the elected officials who have joined us out there. Thank you for your leadership, especially during these challenging times. Feels like we were about to get back, and then here we are. So Bill, I'm looking forward to the healthcare update, but to all of our electeds, your work is critically important to the future of this place. So thank you for everything that you do. And the rest of you who've joined us this morning, it's always great to be with our chamber partners talking about what we can do together to really shape the future of this region. And that is just what we're going to do today as we present to you the economic impact study for the Transformational Mobility Network. And I'm not going to steal Paul and Daniel's thunder, but really there are 3 points that I want you to take away from this morning. And the first one is that this region is experiencing phenomenal growth. And there really is a fundamental need to harness this growth in a way that is inclusive, that is smart, and that is effective. Secondly, there is a cost to doing nothing here. So we certainly can let growth happen to us. We can follow in the footsteps of a certain southern neighbor down the road from us, or we really can be smart about investing in the future of the Charlotte region. And then third, we have a solution. The Transformational Mobility Network certainly represents an opportunity for us to prioritize physical connections that are going to move people and products all around our region. And we call it TMN, a mouthful, Transformational Mobility Network, TMN. It is and will be the largest economic development project in the history of North Carolina. It certainly has great potential to integrate regional solutions, so connecting all the dots across our community's growing mobility needs. And I know that if we do this with partners like you all across our multi-county region, because the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance's footprint is actually City of Charlotte, Mecklenburg County, and then 14 more counties across 2 states, and working in concert with all of you, we know that our economic competitiveness, that vibrancy, on how we win and compete for investment, doing TMN in a project of this scale is going to shine a much bigger, a much brighter spotlight on our ability to attract and retain and grow businesses and the talent that's going to fuel those businesses. So given all of that, the Alliance is just really pleased to be leading and advocating for this work. I've got a little bit more that I want to say before I turn it over to Paul, but you just need to know, we are certainly growing by the day. We have 127 new people here every day. I'm sure all of you are seeing that, you're welcoming it. This is an incredibly welcoming community. But with that type of rapid growth, we have to have reliable, efficient, and well-connected transportation options, again, to make sure that we're meeting those needs of the growth and being inclusive to people who are coming here, people who have grown up here. And we really believe that a multimodal integrated mobility option is going to help us connect folks to those educational opportunities, those economic and employment opportunities, the cultural opportunities that enrich all of our lives. So the study that we're going to hear about examines those modes. We know that one mode alone isn't going to solve for all of those needs that exist. And we know that they have to work in tandem really to create that transformation that's required. So I won't steal the thunder that Daniel and Paul have around these hard-hitting impacts, but we do know, again, growth's happening. Doing nothing is really not an option for us, and we must plan and make those investments. So we're excited about all of the transportation plans that are happening across the region. We know that all of you out there, whether it's transportation or land use or other things that you're working on, are critical to the vibrancy of our region. And we know from Cornelius to Gaston and Matthews to Fort Mill, we have a unique window. We've got this special window, this special moment to invest in a comprehensive infrastructure that's going to benefit all the residents and preserve our quality of life. So at this time, I am really pleased to introduce Paul Shoemaker, although I know he is no stranger to most of you out there. For more than 4 decades, and he doesn't look it at all. He's been gray since he was a child. But Paul has created winning data-driven strategies for candidates and businesses at every level, really truly leading to historic transformation for North Carolina's political landscape. He's described as the data guy behind North Carolina Republicans, who, as one of the longest serving political consultants in our state, he is distinguished by clear and honest direction based on historical, current, and projected data, business, and political climates. Paul believes firmly that winning tough races requires deliberate and strategic planning with disciplined, measured, and data-tested messaging. And we are at the Alliance very fortunate to be partnering with him on this transformational work for our region. So Paul, I'm going to turn the floor to you, sir.
Great, Janet, appreciate it very much. Thank you. And thank you everyone taking the time this morning to join us on this discussion. I'm going to keep my comments relatively brief because some of you may be wondering what's a political consultant doing on this on this call, because I'm clearly not an economist. This is a project when the Business Alliance reached out with an RFP process that I actually reached across the aisle to Nexus Strategy with Morgan Jackson, Representative Roy Cooper, and told him this is something that we ought to look at doing together. Both of us have a strong footprint in North Carolina politics, and looking at the public policy development side. I had a special interest here, quite frankly, for the simple reason I've done a lot of work in Mecklenburg County, done a lot of work in North Mecklenburg. And 15 years ago, I did a survey for a gentleman by the name of Tom Tillis when he was making his first run for North Carolina House. And I was thinking about the comments for today, and that survey 15 years ago, the number one issue was growth and traffic congestion. So now U.S. Senator Tom Tillis, but he based that campaign 15 years ago on the platform that doing nothing was simply not an option. Our consulting team is part of an outreach program for the Alliance to build a regional working partnership that is a multi-county focused partnership. We are going to have obstacles in our way. Morgan and I both have pretty good proven track records of trying to work to remove obstacles or develop strategies to work around obstacles. But reality is what Janet was referencing is very clear. This region is only going to continue to grow. If we wait for the next 1 million people to show up into this MSA, it's going to be too late to do something. We have an opportunity. Senator Tart, who I have worked with closely, and Jeff, you probably heard me say this more than once in our conversations. Our quality of tomorrow is determined by the decisions we make today. And we have some critical decisions in front of us. We reached out to, and with the Alliance, I should say the Alliance did, I think they interviewed 7 different firms. They narrowed that field down to 2, and then the consulting team and others, a broader universe of individuals, did the final 2 interviews. We selected the NC State team, the Institute for Transportation Research and Education. They've done a lot of work in North Carolina. We all know the NC State brand. Our task to them was not just to do an economic impact study, say, hey, this is going to be for the region. I think all of us would agree spending more money on any transportation mode is going to have a positive outcome. The real question is, what about if we continue to do things the same way and we just don't do nothing to implement mass transit? I just concluded and actually did a briefing for members of Congress on the North Carolina delegation for a client statewide, and we incorporated mass transit questions into there. And what was interesting, that in the suburban urban areas, it had deep support that ranged in the areas of 70+%, but actually in the rural areas, it was well into the 60s. North Carolina is a growing state. We are going to, because of smart community leaders and the investment that individuals like yourself have made in this state, we're going to continue to attract people to come here. The better we do our job, the more they're going to come. And so this is an opportunity for us to do our job and do it better. I'm going to let Daniel Findley with NC State go through the overview here. Daniel, I'll turn it over to you, and then question-wise, we can proceed from there. Thank you all very much.
Paul, thank you for that introduction, and Janet, thanks for your remarks as well. We do thank the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance for their sponsorship of this project and for choosing our team, and really the excellent leadership we got from Kelly O'Brien, Joe Bost, and Laura Ford, and of course our partners at the UNC Charlotte Urban Institute and our dedicated colleagues at ITRI. So our analysis is supported by 4 primary pillars. First, we evaluated the cost of doing nothing. So what happens if we decide to just continue down the path we're currently taking? Second, we analyzed the economic impacts that would result from new investment in each mode. We looked at how new investment in greenways, bus systems, light rail, commuter rail, and roadways would impact the region. This includes the direct, indirect, and induced impacts that result from project expenditures, as well as the influx of new spending that occurs at retail locations as the result of new transportation access. Third, we apprised the quality of life benefits and costs that commuters and individuals living in the region face under our existing transportation system, and how that surplus changes under new investment paradigms. Finally, we had the opportunity to interview over 100 key stakeholders as part of this process. Some of you on this call were part of that process. The information we've gathered from the interviews formed key context for the report. As we move through this presentation, we'll see some key themes. I'm stealing my thunder a little bit here, but I want you to focus on these key takeaways, and Janet alluded to these in her remarks as well. So in terms of the cost of doing nothing, we're going to talk about the substantial cost if the congestion is not addressed, which will result in 126,100 unrealized jobs by 2050. We'll look at the economic impact across modes and see that the benefits are significant across the variety of modes we analyzed. And as we heard from Paul, from this perspective, there are between 740 and 1,780 jobs in Mecklenburg County per $100 million investment, plus an additional 110 to 260 jobs in other counties in the region. As we examine the user costs and considerations for quality of life, we found that the cost per person mile range from 48 cents for bicycles to $1.18 for automobiles. And during our stakeholder interviews, we found that there's an interest in equity outcomes, a desire for more transportation options, and a robust transportation network. From a broad perspective, the fundamental questions that we addressed were, what happens if we do, and what happens if we don't? So we're going to start with the what happens if we don't. And we're going to focus on that change from the current transportation paradigm in the region, and what happens if we stay just in that current paradigm. Specifically, how will congestion impact the region? I'm going to share a little bit about the diseconomies to the workforce that will result from higher business transaction costs that result from congestion. There are 2 primary effects of congestion. These include the erosion of agglomeration benefits and firm site selection behavior. Agglomeration effects occur when firms and people locate together in cities and industrial clusters. People cluster to find the best opportunities in a career field, and industries cluster to attain the best talent. Think of banking in the Charlotte region or pharmaceuticals in the Research Triangle as examples. Agglomeration benefits also occur when firms decide to relocate to be closer to their supply chain inputs and thus reduce their transportation costs. Agglomeration benefits can be inhibited when transaction costs increase, for instance, as a consequence of congestion. Similarly, with site selection, industries may choose to locate within or choose to leave certain regions to reduce travel time costs associated with congestion. We analyzed the effect of congestion on the workforce growth in the Charlotte, Concord, Gastonia metropolitan statistical area. Charlotte's population growth makes it the third fastest growing major US city. And by 2030, Charlotte's projected to be home to approximately 2.74 million residents, which is up from 1.87 million residents in 2010. Congestion impacts started affecting employment in the region in the year 2000, with notable impacts occurring in 2019. We found that in 2019, approximately 20,000 jobs were not realized due to congestion's drag on the workforce. By 2030, we projected up to 47,400 jobs will not be realized due to congestion, 75,000 by 2040, and 109,000 by 2050. In addition to this direct economic impact of not having these workers employees, the region will also miss out on potential economic linkages between the unrealized direct employees that I mentioned and supplier firms that would have interacted with these employees. So we actually see that the congestion constricts our unrealized employees and a number of the business-to-business activities, which are known as indirect effects, as well as the additional rounds of spending that would occur in the economy from the direct and indirect employees spending their earnings in the region. The costs of doing nothing are projected to increase over time and have substantial economic impacts in the next decade. By the end of 2030, when considering the multiplier effects, up to 93,900 jobs, 6.6 billion in wages, 18.4 billion in sales, and $2 billion in tax receipts could go unrealized. This would equate to not realizing 2 to 5% of the region's GDP. Now that we've touched on what happens if we do nothing, let's discuss the impacts of investing in the region's transportation infrastructure. The impacts that will be discussed include those that result from the capital investment impacts or the direct, indirect, and induced impacts that result from capital project expenditures. An input-output model is a representation of the flows of economic activity between sectors within a region. The model captures what business or sector must purchase from each other sector in order to produce a dollar's worth of goods or services. Using such a model, flows of economic activity associated with any change in spending may be traced either forwards, such as going along the spending, which generates employees' wages, which further induces spending, or backwards, where we're looking at visitor purchases of mills, which leads restaurants to purchase additional inputs, such as groceries and utilities. Multipliers for a region may be derived from an input-output model for the region's economy. M-Plan is the modeling software we used, and just so you know, this is actually headquartered here in the region in Huntersville. Something we don't think about too often is how we spend our money relative to how we travel to our destination. Active transportation users spend less per retail trip than drivers. However, in instances where active transportation access is available, people make more trips to their destinations and are likely to spend more overall on a monthly or yearly basis. So in other words, if people can walk, bike, or take transit to their destination, they will make more trips and outspend their automobile counterparts. Public transportation is critical to the region's residents who use it, and even those who do not. It's a lifeline for many as it provides mobility options, generates jobs, spurs economic growth, and supports public policies regarding energy use, air quality, and carbon emissions. All of these are important elements to consider for the economic impact of public transportation. According to recent onboard surveys in the United States, 68% of bus riders and 50% of rail riders reported they did not have a car available for their transit trip. Public transportation is also a vital method of access for shopping and retail. And similar to the active modes I mentioned previously, transit customers will make 110 more trips to restaurants, drinking places, and convenience stores than drivers over the course of the year, and outspend drivers by approximately $1,800 annually. As part of our analysis, we also evaluated the economic and land use changes associated with highway projects in Mecklenburg County. We compared land development patterns, the number of firms and jobs within 1 mile of completed highway projects, to a control group of roads that did not experience a major road project during the time period. Here we saw a 12% growth in classification from undeveloped to developed land cover status, compared to 6% in areas along roadways where no new project occurred. We also evaluated parcel data to see changes in building patterns in Mecklenburg County. We found that construction of building structures and single-family homes increased at a higher rate within proximity to road projects than in areas where no road projects occurred. We analyzed changes in the number of business establishments and employment within 1 mile of interstates and NC highways. And we found that there's overall high growth in proximity to road projects. One of the most important goals of our research is to be able to demonstrate what $100 million of transportation investment can offer the region. In this image, we can see how an investment in 6 different modes of transportation gives rise to a series of economic impacts. In the middle circle, we can see the direct capital investment that is made for a mode. In the next ring, we see the secondary or indirect and induced effects that have resulted from that $100 million expenditure. And finally, in that last ring, we can see the retail sales impacts, where new retail purchases are made and continue to be made over time as a result of new transportation access to various storefronts. In addition to economic impact, which focus on the economy and businesses, we also conducted analysis on the social costs of these transportation modes. This analysis helps remind us there's other considerations in addition to the economic impacts of a particular project or mode. This information further underscores the importance of a balanced portfolio of transportation investments to provide equitable mobility and a robust network of transportation options. These results are presented in terms of per person mile of travel, which is very important as we interpret these results. In our analysis, we included the direct cost of transport for the users, which includes bus and transit fares, the cost of equipment for cycling and driving expenses, including fuel, maintenance, repair, tires, insurance, state driving fees, registration, taxes, depreciation, and financing. A lot of things captured in there on our cost of operating a vehicle. Parking costs are included for automobiles. Travel time is one of the largest categories of transport costs, and time savings are often the greatest expected benefit of transport improvement projects. The speed of the mode and the travel distance are also important factors there. Traffic congestion is widely recognized as a transportation cost, and as a road reaches its capacity, each additional vehicle imposes more total delay. Congestion tends to increase travel time, arrival unreliability, fuel consumption, pollution emissions, and driver stress. Noise pollution occurs from high level of environmental sound. Motor vehicles cause various types of noise, including engine acceleration, the contact between the tire and the road, braking, horns, and vehicle alarm thefts. Heavy vehicles can also cause vibration and low frequency noise. Individuals experience differing levels of health risk depending on how they travel. Driving imposes the greatest risk of fatality on a per trip basis, and also puts commuters using other modes of travel, such as cycling and walking, at risk. Emission costs refer to the harm caused by motor vehicle air emissions, including damages to human and ecological health. Community severance, which is also known as the barrier effect, refers to delays, discomfort, and lack of access that vehicle traffic impose on non-motorized modes. Severance usually focuses on the impacts of new or wider highways, while the barrier effect takes into account the impacts of vehicle traffic. The U.S. Center for Disease Control recommends that adults average at least 22 daily minutes of moderate physical activity, such as brisk walking, to stay fit and healthy. Although less than half of Americans achieve this target, most public transportation passengers do exercise the recommended amount while walking to and from transit stations and stops. Of the variables evaluated, direct transport costs, such as the vehicle and bicycle operating and maintenance costs, transit ticket fares, etc., and value of time costs, the opportunity cost of travel, comprise the greatest share of per mile costs. Speed and distance are important factors in this analysis, so as we interpret the results, we need to consider that a walking trip is typically much shorter than a driving trip. So while we see in this chart in terms of person miles, we need to consider that walking trip may be 1 or 2 miles or less, while a driving trip may be dozens of miles. So the total cost of a trip will usually be much lower for a walking trip overall than a driving trip. The value of time component also plays an outsized role for the walking mode relative to the other modes, And this is primarily because the speed of a walking trip compared to those other modes. Physical health benefits per person mile of commute travel are greatest for walking and cycling. And transit users also experience health benefits because their trips typically involve at least a portion of walking. So these social benefits and the costs that I just described accrue per person mile of commute travel in Mecklenburg County were analyzed. Direct transport costs make up 53% of social costs associated with driving, while the value of time consists of 95% of the social costs associated with walking. Findings demonstrated that cycling imposes the lowest net social cost per person mile traveled, while automobile travel imposes the highest social cost. So overall, summarizing our study, we can quantify the substantial cost of doing nothing. In the medium impact scenario, an estimated 126,100 jobs are unrealized in the region by 2050. We see substantial benefits across the variety of modes that we considered, where each $100 million investment would generate a range of 740 to 1,780 jobs in Mecklenburg County, plus an additional 110 to 260 jobs throughout the region. And in addition to these economic impacts, we evaluated user costs and quality of life aspects and found that the cost per person mile ranged from 48 cents for bicycles to $1.18 for automobiles. Having met with over 100 key stakeholders in the region, we've truly had the chance to hear about the value that the region's leaders place on new infrastructure investment. And knowing that the transformational mobility network is greater than just the uptown area, we spent significant time during the months of May through July, speaking with stakeholders throughout the county and the region, focusing on communities who use current and future transportation infrastructure as travel options. We had around 45 meetings with over 100 individuals, and these individuals represented public, academic, nonprofit, and private sector organizations. More importantly, they represented their communities and were able to provide us with honest feedback on their personal and community experiences with current transportation options, as well as their hopes for future transportation investments. There were several themes that emerged from these stakeholder conversations, and for this presentation, I'll briefly summarize a few of those higher level, more prominent themes. First was the regional lens. Stakeholders were optimistic about the general regional approach to transportation planning and want transportation projects that will be beneficial to their local communities and the region as a whole. Stakeholders are eager for transportation options that will connect different parts of the county and the region to each other because they understand the value that this connectedness brings to the region. As one example, there were several mentions for a more reliable and higher capacity north-south connection to meet the travel needs of individuals who live in North Mecklenburg but work towards the city center and vice versa. Thinking about the workforce, improving mobility options for the region's workforce was one of the primary reasons why stakeholders felt the need for a regional transportation approach. We heard from stakeholders that for many of our local communities, automobile congestion and the lack of other modes of transportation is already a high burden for many working individuals. And as I previously mentioned, if investments are not made to manage traffic demand and alleviate congestion, it can continue to have serious implications on the region's economy and workforce. Lastly, the people that we spoke to want a transportation plan that offers multiple modes of transportation options, not just personal vehicle travel. Many mention the use of greenways, not just for recreation, but also as a means for getting to and from work. Others are excited about the high capacity options, such as light rail, as well as bus rapid transit options. And of course, stakeholders noted that all modes must work together as a cohesive system. In summary, from our stakeholder engagement, one of the key messages that we heard from stakeholders is the desire for a robust transportation network, one that is multimodal and will connect different parts of the county and the region to improve transportation for the region's workforce and economic growth. Also want to thank everyone who participated in these stakeholder conversations for your invaluable feedback. And I want to reiterate how proud we are of these discussions and bringing the voice of the region into the study with those 45 meetings with over 100 individuals. So I know I've shared a lot of information. There's a lot of detail in this study, and we're thrilled to be part of this and lead this effort for the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance. And at this time, I'd be glad to take questions.
And your
There you
Colin
go.
first share. Sorry.
No,
Can you
you're
give a
fine.
timeline of the study? And can you share what the impact of the work from home aspect that we've started to see lately is on this?
So the timeline as far as when we worked on it, or what our timeline of analysis was?
The timeline when you worked on it, the period of time that you worked on it.
Yeah, so great question. We certainly hit the ground running. I believe we started in April. Is that correct, from the Alliance team? And it's been a whirlwind. We completed things by the end of July, and have worked since then to refine some of our products and prepare for presentations and the outreach that resulted from this. So the bulk of the analysis and effort really happened May, June, and July. So 3 months essentially. And credit goes to the team. And I've got a full list of the authors or in the executive summary. So if you want to see who all was involved from the ITRI team and from the Urban Institute team, you can see that in the executive summary. So huge credit to that team and to the Alliance for providing a tremendous amount of support to make everything come together. As far as the work from home, you're exactly right that this certainly has an impact, and that's something that we did build into our analysis when we looked at what we call do nothing, but it's somewhat of a status quo type of analysis. And we did incorporate increased levels of work from home because we are expecting that that's going to be with us for a while. I think we all expect that there's going to be a larger percentage of the workforce that does work from home. And so we did incorporate that into our modeling. So of course, if it reverts back to pre-pandemic work from home percentages, these impacts would actually be worse. And that's one of the reasons in our work, we did provide some scenarios, a low, medium, and high, because there are just things that we don't know. And we do want to provide that ability for people to look and say, well, I think it's going to be a lower impact. So you maybe look at those numbers versus medium or high impact. Yeah, great question.
One of the things I would ask, because we've got so many people on here and being able to track, is if you don't mind, maybe for at least initially, if you'll type in comments into the chat and we'll try to pull stuff off. I'm sure questions that are asked will be requested or potentially of multiple people. It'll be a little easier to keep control of this so we don't gang up on everybody. Next question, while some of these questions are coming in, have you guys looked at what the solution would look like?
And by solution, you mean picking the exact
to address the issues you brought up that need addressed through a multi-modality transportation solution.
Yeah, Janet, do you want to weigh in on this? Or
Sure. Yeah. And thank you, Senator, for that. The study was our first key piece, in this whole effort. And really the study was done, to help inform what those buckets, what those modes are going to do in terms of how that starts to shape the plan. So the solution, generally we know that it needs to be transformative, regional, connected. The analysis that Daniel just presented in terms of evaluating the different types of modes is now kind of the next step of what we need to do to continue understanding how to build the right pieces that are going to comprise the solution. But the study was really our first bit, and really you are all our first region, our first audience outside of our rollout that happened a week ago or so to help socialize this and get more input, to how we hear what priorities are evaluated by the community.
I'm sorry, go ahead and finish.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, Janet, if you don't mind expanding, I know you're kind of commenting with Dr. Miltic. Mike is the chair for our CRTPO up here, and you guys are talking about Connect Beyond. Can you elaborate on that and how it fits with your efforts?
Absolutely. So Geraldine Gardner, of course, she actually sits on our board, and she's a great partner when it comes to regionalism here. So we're wearing that hat. But we've been writing alongside with MTC and Centralina's Connect Beyond initiative. And I'd certainly invite Mike to talk more about that. But that is really the region's first coordinated bi-state transit system planning process. And so when I mentioned that we are collaborating and cooperating on the messaging points, the recommendations that are coming out of Connect Beyond, we're also wanting to understand how does that build, augment, and amplify, the work that we're doing over here with the TMN. So we do have a shared vision. To Mike's point, I think the results, we know the recommendations are drafted out there, and I think that they will be finalized, Mike, if I'm not mistaken, in the next week or two. So we're very excited about that, and we have been working alongside Geraldine and her team on that process.
Great.
Yeah, I think we're approaching deliverables on Connect Beyond, and I found this presentation very interesting because it looked at the economic impact, which transportation planners don't get into that aspect. So I think this would be a great presentation to give to part of our, we have an educational session prior to the CRTPO board meeting. And I think that's dovetailing very nice with that.
That would be great. We'd love to do it.
Daniel, a couple questions coming in. One, and if you can elaborate on, talks about how health benefits are actually determined and calculated, because the question becomes, intuitively you'd say if you're just driving everywhere, you're not going to get a health benefit versus if you're riding 22 miles a day on a bicycle. However, how do you factor the person who only has walking capability, but no immediate access to a greenway or a park perhaps, and the person who drives every day and then goes and rides his bike on the greenway for 50 miles on a weekend? How does that balance and foot?
Yeah, and I think it's, these are important questions, and it's things that in transportation we wrestle with all the time, of when we use modes and transportation for transport versus for recreation, and you can certainly get health benefits in both of those. For this, we tried to focus on using it as a means of transport and getting that kind of transport benefit out of this from that perspective. And are you also folding in the question about the health benefits for vehicle and not for
Correct.
others? So I'll address that too. And one of the things we always push for in our studies is to try to provide intermediate results so that you can see them, and you can, if you disagree with some of the assumptions, that you can easily and quickly make those leaps on your own. So, the big picture numbers were bicycling on a social cost per person mile, 48 cents, vehicles $1.18. But you're exactly right. You've got to do some kind of walking when you park your vehicle. We assumed it was zero because it probably is close to zero in most cases. But as you mentioned, if you park, a couple of blocks away and you walk, you are getting some walking benefit there. So with our intermediate tables, you can see that the value of health for bus and light rail was about 5 cents, and for commuter rail was about 2 cents, based on travel data and travel trip lengths and those things. And so if you wanted to assign those same values to driving, you could do that as well. So you could add that in that portion. That's why we provide those intermediate steps. You can see exactly what we did and the numbers we came up with, the process we used to come up with those numbers.
And kind of related area and shift is, are there any, if we're going to look at a multimodality solution, are there any aspects in that solution that will be financially self-sustainable, or does every mode require a subsidy of some sort through taxes, what have you, or can they be self-sustaining?
Daniel, do you have the answer to that?
So I guess I have a broad answer to it. I don't maybe have a region specific. I guess I'm not prepared to maybe answer a region or Charlotte region specific. But generally worldwide, very few systems are transit systems. Public transit, mass transit are 100% fare box receipt funded. Essentially the only ones that are, New York City comes close to that, and then college campuses are close to that, but that's just because they can force all students to pay for the bus systems through their fees. And so a lot of cities and municipalities, regions have decided that there's enough public benefit to those systems to subsidize those. And I think a lot of that goes into much bigger policy decisions and discussions than what we covered in this study, but those are things to think about. And Janet, if you've got anything to add there, that would be fine.
Yeah, well, and I think it was just building on your last comments that I wanted to add is so I moved to Charlotte from Portland, Oregon, Senator, as you had established at the onset of your remarks. And the Portland metro area is extremely diverse in its options for multimodal, transportation. And so, to Daniel's point just then, there is typically a cost, to all one of the greenways, specifically bikeways, certainly bus, light rail, transit, highways, maintenance, all of that stuff. Certainly there is a public subsidy to that cost. But when it comes to public transportation, I mean, I think that's the dream, right? Is that we can all think about the various modes that we have an opportunity to build and invest in when it comes to, moving people along. In addition to, just getting to work and getting to school, or getting, in my case, to soccer practices all over the community, we need to be able to do this in a way that is functional and that is connected. So I think there are certainly broader benefits to this beyond the health piece of this. There are the social costs, the economic costs and benefits of it.
So
I just want to add that.
So kind of related, then we talked about in part of the presentation that there's really 6 modalities that we're looking at, from sidewalks to roads to mass transit. How will those different modalities be selected and prioritized in a single MSA relative to, and then funding? And does that have to fit into the traditional STIP model and CRTPO prioritizations within CDOT? Or do we have some flexibility to figure it out on our own? And kind of related, it's again, paying for prioritizing as well, is have we looked at, the old South Carolina model, pennies for progress, those types of things, that so everybody gets a piece of a solution rather than it all going in one geographic area and nobody else getting a benefit?
Yes, there's definitely a need to do that. And again, I think that's where connecting to, whether it's Connect Beyond with Centralina and MTC, or if that is connecting to the plans that are underway in Union and Gaston and York and others, where, every municipality and every jurisdiction is looking at their growth. They might be doing it within their own boundaries of their community. But that's why it's so important for us to be out here with the study, socializing and having the conversations, so that we can think about this as shared priorities. And so I'm not maybe answering the directness of your question, Senator, when it comes, or whoever's question that was, as it relates to this particular study and analysis that Daniel and NC State and Charlotte have done. However, it is why we did it, and then why we need to start talking about it with groups like yours, so that we can get those inputs and then inform, the policy bodies and the policy makers on why we need a plan to do this. So it's a fantastic comment. It's exactly why we're here today.
And kind of related to that, and you've mentioned it in a question the mayor asked, actually, how do you envision, what's the process to engage the entire MSA? How do you encourage or incentivize a Gastonia or a Concord or Mooresville, for that matter, to participate and contribute to the solution?
Well, it is, again, starting with groups like yours today, coming up behind us. We've got other chamber partners that we'll be seeing in Gaston and Cabarrus and in York and others. And just so the crowd knows, we do convene those groups. I mean, Bill's part of that group. We're seeing them regularly. We've been talking about TMN, the work behind this, and now it is getting out to broader stakeholders. Part of the focus groups that Daniel mentioned that were done in conjunction with the IAS was to get a broader net of regional stakeholders to solicit their thoughts around, what's important to you as we think about, this community. But I would underscore that we all have a rallying and a sense of urgency that we need, because as I said in the beginning of this, growth is happening. We really can't afford to not think about what that growth means to this region. So the shared kind of the baseline fundamental is that we have a challenge. I mean, Paul mentioned, growth is going to happen to us. Let's be smart about how we address it. And so again, how we get that stakeholder buy-in is making that compelling business case. And now the study gives us, you know, the footing and the data behind why we can start to have a more data-driven narrative, which again, to Paul's background, data is so important to the decisions that we make and where we invest.
A next question, which is kind of maybe the most central question, again, to this whole conversation, is how critical is an additional sales tax to being able to advance the solution forward? And what other financing options are there that we can consider?
Okay, well, that's
not to ask you, just put you on the spot, you know.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one that I don't know that we've got the answer to yet. You know, we've got to have conversations with our policymakers, certainly in Raleigh. There's a lot of steps to this process. Again, the first one really was getting the study done. I guess the short answer to that is it's still a work in progress, and additional financing is our conversations that we need to have with the city, with towns, with, you know, the county certainly, and how this is going to actually impact residents. But we're trying to build the case and underscore the narrative that this is going to happen to us. So how, you know, how are we going to pay for this? How are we going to get this done? What makes sense? Here are the benefits to doing it. Here's the consequences of not doing it. And that I get that is at the heart of it, you know, maybe the elephant in the room. But we as a community have to invest. I mean, there's no question. How we do that and how we get to it is certainly still in conversation.
Well, I'll address, you mentioned the elephant. I'm going to go to the gorilla in the room, and this prior to your involvement, because it's historical, but has, I think, a great bearing on whether the plan's going to, and particularly the funding mechanism, if it is a request for an additional sales tax increase on the Lake Norman region, is fundamentally how does Charlotte reestablish trust with the northern communities and actually all the suburbs? We bought into, agreed to, supported the sales tax increase. The red line originally was a dual #1 priority with the blue line. And then we've had nothing and been paying for a decade and a half. So again, the question is, how does Charlotte reestablish trust? And is it appropriate to ask the region to continue to pay when the history is we'd get no benefit? Or would it be more appropriate, and is it even possible, bring the solution, implement it day one, and then we can start contributing additionally as needed?
Yeah,
Jump in here real quick,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Sure thing.
This is, I think, Jeff, you hit to the heart of part of the reasons why I'm on this meeting today and why we built out a team. When we first started having discussions, I guess back in late February, early March, this was viewed as a transit project for Charlotte and a sales tax request. And that was the whole narrative here. And quite frankly, it was misguided narrative generated by multiple news sources, and just quite frankly not realizing the challenges here. One of the reasons why you no longer see about the discussions about a referendum and the timing and this going to happen before it's going to happen this year, and quite frankly by March it was supposed to have already happened this year. No, this is a regional project. The city has been very, in our conversations with them, are very mindful of that, very outreach. It's from a revenue standpoint right now, it's Mecklenburg. But just like with the Connect Beyond and other crowds, other stakeholders here in the outlying areas, they're looking to want to build out their plans based upon what's being done in Mecklenburg and how those plans are designed to interconnect with their communities regionally throughout the whole MSA. One of my first discussion with Daniel, and I will tell you this, some of the people can resonate with this, but I grew up in Caldwell County. And I told Daniel, I said, look, I'm not an economist. I don't have a PhD, but what I need to know is a 321 corridor model, because I saw my community in Southern Caldwell being totally transformed by that infrastructure improvement, which was an investment in highways, and those dollars spent to build that highway system. Not all that revenue was dollar for dollar coming out of that region. There was other regions that subsidized that through the collection of of gas taxes and other, I'm sure part of the Mecklenburg residents paid for the construction of that road place. So what's important and where we transition to, and I cannot speak for the city, I know that the city is very much mindful of that, very much about restoring trust and working with all the local municipalities to build out a model so that the revenues that are generated, if there is additional revenues come into the equation, those revenues are applicable to being able to meet the transportation improvement needs locally within those communities as well. The key thing here is that, and reality is, you've got federal dollars that are undetermined at this point in time, which will impact the overall scope of the project. The question is going to be how much at the end of the day, what's the appetite for what do we want to really do? And are we willing to, we have a responsibility to make sure that folks know the downside of not doing it as well. And so that's sort of where we are. And that's one of the reasons why what we've tried to do here is get the narrative away from this is just a project for Charlotte. No, this is a regional project and we got to have regional buy-in. And quite frankly, this is the beginning of the process. You guys are the first ones, and that shows you the priority and the commitment here. And we're going to continue to go through and go out the region. And once the foundation has been laid in the communities, then we will start the discussions at a legislative and at a higher level. And every bit of that through this whole process is contingent upon a trust factor for all of us. And the highest bar to meet here is the city. And I think they are aware of it because I know that I've taken my time to try to explain it to them on more than one occasion.
So I'm going to pivot a little bit, and I don't know, Daniel, maybe this is a question towards you, do you know what opportunity costs were factored or considered when you did the I-plan model?
So, we focused, our scope was just around this effort. It wasn't what other things could be done with it, which, is an important question, but we didn't, for instance, balance, what if you took this money and applied it somewhere else? So we did not do this. We did not do an opportunity cost or opportunity analysis with this. We focused just on the scope that we have in front of us with the TMN.
Gotcha. And maybe this is a kind of a curious question, and I don't know if it's beyond where you are in the study yet, but as you build out a multimodality system, I think the older plan, or the one that's been to date, has multiple modalities. The problem is it's on the same trip. So if you had the red line, you would get to a certain place. There's not a central terminus to transfer easily. You would end up, and then you'd have to take a cab or a bus to get to the next line. You go to the airport, you want to take it to the airport, but it stops 1 mile short of the airport. How are we looking at, or is anyone looking at the design issues to really make a full regional transportation system really efficient, effective, and optimum?
We did hear that from the stakeholder interviews. I mean, over and over again, of the importance of those connective projects. And we've done research on specific projects that show those last little pieces of the system that are remaining because they're tough, right? A lot of times, all those projects, that last little bit is the toughest part of how do these things fit together? How do they work together? How do you, involve this maybe sensitive area or historic area or just a commercialized area? And I think you're spot on that those are the key to this whole system. Are those nodes in place where you can seamlessly transfer from, either different lines in the same mode or different modalities, because any barrier you have gives people a reason not to take that mode. And so we've got to make it seamless. It's got to be integrated. There's lots of new technologies that help make that happen. And on the infrastructure side, a lot of work has been done to show that if we make those connections possible, people will use them.
Do factors go into the design as far as where a line would run relative to where people want to go, if you will, or are currently aggregating, as far as an employer? Like the red line is a natural, it seems intuitive that it would run all the way to the Lowe's campus, as an example. Sort of thing.
Yeah, Senator, I think that's where the planning process and folks like Mike out there with, the folks who are sitting at a regional table of planning need to marry up with where the community priorities are, need to marry up with the business input, which is where we come in, and really trying to make sure that we are being thoughtful and comprehensive in bringing and elevating all those voices at the same level, so that no one of them is happening in isolation. And so, as Daniel just said around the airport connection, I mean, we've heard that so many times. And so, gosh, if we went and made this list of projects and that wasn't in there somewhere, and when I say we, I mean the royal we here, what a miss that would be for the community. What economic opportunity or consequence will we lose by not having that connection there? And that's why I'm saying I think we really need to level all of the conversations that are happening. We believe firmly that the study gives us at least the platform to have the conversations. And then I think that's where we start to, help prioritize, what actually shapes into a TMN.
The question that's being asked, and I think this is a really germane one, kind of takes us into future state. What technologies or solutions in that transportation model fit? For an example, is diesel commuter really still a consideration, or is it a time and a technology that should be sunset, if you will? And the secondary or related area is, because of the connectivity points, physicality of the region creates barriers. You're not going to, it's going to be very difficult to find the transportation center and physically getting certain lines to it. Does that require us, are we willing to consider, and it is cost effective, to go to underground, to build tunnels, and is that a traditional subway system like Atlanta and DC? And do we have a 5 points and a metro stop in that model? And is it viable for things like Elon Musk technology? I know we've been looking at it, but the whole boring solution. So thoughts?
And you want to talk a little bit, because some of that's in the study.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, those are all great questions, and we do allude to those in the study. So ultimately, we didn't pick, we didn't evaluate specific alignments, specific modes, and specific locations, just the nature of the study. As you've seen, there's been a lot of great studies on very specific modes and technologies, and those should all be part of the discussion. I think it's important when you identify, hey, there's a need to connect, this area and this area. Everything should be on the table, in my opinion. Of all new technologies, you got to think about, what's the feasibility and the maturity of those technologies? Will it fit the need? I'm a huge advocate for, at that planning process, including all these things. There's lots of great partners in the region who are looking at all those alternatives, looking at the modes, looking at those considerations, and thinking about what could be the right fit for the region and for that specific location.
And I'll just echo what Daniel said around the alternative transportation and future technologies, if you will, Senator, to the question, is that really should be all on the table, as well as the feasibility and the studying to make sure that these are things that have been, proven, if you will, in other parts of the country. I think that is important for us to consider, and how wonderful would it be for us to be a region that's leading on smart technologies. So I would just echo that.
So if we're looking at a plan that takes us out to 2050, and we've got automobile manufacturers committing in less than 5 years that they will go completely electric, what impact does EV have on this, if any at all? And secondarily, if it's a 2050, people are saying by 2035, people will no longer own private automobiles. We'll be in an autonomous auto or vehicle mode. How does that change or impact the plan and direction for a multimodality transit system, if at all?
I'll take a crack at that one. So we don't have a crystal ball to know, but to your point, Senator, there are business decisions being made within industry. I think what Paul alluded to earlier with the mention of federal dollars will probably have some requirements to thinking about clean and efficient and again, smart options when it comes to that. So I don't know that we have the answer to that today, but I do think, just given the current administration, that we're going to see some guardrails, some parameters come down with federal dollars. That's my sense. But there's probably some other elected officials like you and others on the call who have a little bit more history in that area.
Well, appreciate that. Daniel or whomever, can you guys elaborate a little bit on what was factored into the environmental impact, the depth and degree and sophistication of that effort? And were each of the 6 modes, transportation modes, factored into the environmental impact study?
Yeah, great question. So in the social cost per person mile traveled, and I think this question maybe even ties into some of the other questions I've seen in the chat, but we did look at emission costs and noise costs in particular. And depending on how you define the terms used in that question with environmental, the community severance and the barrier effect were also included there in terms of, looking at the environment and what impact these modes have. Again, it comes back to the largest portions of those in terms of costs are the direct transport costs and the value of time costs, but we did factor in those other components. And it is provided in that table with the social costs. And another thing important to keep in mind for this is all of these values on the social costs and social benefit side of things are per person mile. And so, some of these numbers, they seem low, but it's because it's looking at just 1 mile. So you've got to think about it in terms of the overall trip. And so if you're taking a 10-mile trip, you need to multiply those values by 10 in order to come up with the trip cost.
And another area kind of for clarification, and if there's any specificity around it, is the unrealized jobs component. What jobs would be unrealized? Is there a particular type, skill set or not? And secondarily, are they determined by location? Are they more center city, or can you identify where those unrealized jobs would happen? And is there any mitigation strategy besides transit that would prevent not missing out those opportunities? Is transit the only way to create those jobs?
Yeah, great series of questions and line of thinking in this. And so it is MSA specific. So that's what we use some MSA wide data and some models that were developed looking at that drag on the workforce throughout the MSA. And so it's specific to the MSA, and that's how we modeled this. And we could certainly develop or provide the breakdown of jobs and the assumptions of that in the regional model, but we haven't done that explicitly yet, but we just focused on that overall drag on the economy. Again, the metric there was focused on congestion and not really how to solve it or what way would solve it. So the methods, the investments that go into it would need to be considerate of congestion and ways to remove that. And I don't think that transit is necessarily the only way. You brought up one earlier that the work from home is going to have some effect on congestion, right? So if employers change their paradigm of how people work, transit, I think, certainly plays a large role. We've seen across the country that we can't build ourselves out of congestion. We see, 14, 16, 18 lanes of highways into some of these major cities that are auto dependent, and the congestion doesn't get better. You're moving more cars on it, but you're still seeing the same delays on those freeways that you saw before that investment was made. And so those are things that have to be considered as part of this process.
So kind of moving towards the end, we're kind of getting close on time, but question, and Janet, maybe put this to you a little bit, put you on the spot. What's the desired outcome for you guys as sharing this report? What do you want to see happen?
I think, transformation and, making sure that we're smart, that we can handle the needs of the growth that's happening to our community. And I just heard yesterday, because we've been using this conversation around Atlanta, around kind of what Daniel was just saying, not being able to pave our way out of congestion. Someone said, well, we've done that before in Charlotte. We've said, let's not be Atlanta. And then we've made the exact same mistakes. And so, if I have anything to do with it, I don't want to see us go there. We have got to be, and now that's really an opportunity for us to be a leader in how we think about the growth and leveraging that to our advantage. Thinking about, again, the business investment that for companies who are here to create jobs so that their employees can get to and from, or the manufacturers that are in our community that can make products and move those, all up and down the East Coast and then across the country. There is a definitely competitiveness aspect to us, selfishly at the Alliance, as we're thinking about driving the economic engine of this community, that this is a choice we have to make. And if we don't make it, that's fine. It'll be harder for us to keep the talent, to keep the jobs, to keep the companies here, as well as see new companies, want to invest here. And it is competitive. I will continue to use that term because other markets are doing this. Austin just passed this after a failed attempt. Nashville had a failed attempt a few years ago. They're gonna go out and get it again, try it again. And so, we're not alone in this boat of where companies make decisions on. And so for us, selfishly, it is really about making sure that we are transformational in our realization of a transportation plan.
So with this,
let me jump in here real quick, Jeff, just
ahead,
because this goes back to the first conversation that you and I had about this. And I think the takeaway here is that we're looking for working partners in with the Alliance in making this a truly regional project that's committed to a not just developing a good plan, that's a comprehensive plan that also meets the needs. And in those partnerships, we need to help partners who are committed to helping us remove barriers. I use the barriers. You mentioned the red line. You talked a lot about the red line. North Fork Southern red line is the best solution. That is the solution that needs to go down. And we've talked about the boring company and other solutions, and there's a lot of other solutions that are out there. But if that becomes the end all that has to be done, then that's a barrier that has to be removed. And we got partners. And quite frankly, the reason why I'm sitting here at the table today is that barrier has to be removed. I'm going to be the guy focused on trying to move it. And I'll be asking the partners here just have the stomach for the fight, because we can do it if we truly want to do it. So the takeaway here is, one is we need working partners. Two is folks within your organizations there with the chamber that can help become part of a broader regional group that helps try to shape this and also address some of the questions and concerns that goes back to building the trust here. So this is part of it. And let's not have a narrative that is debated within news media and news sources as far as this and that and get battle lines drawn. Let's have a plan first. And that's sort of really what I've been encouraged about, is because I walked in and said, hey, we're going to do there's a need for the campaign. No, there's not the need for the campaign right now. Right now, there's a need to build the community partnerships and relationships so that we have the best comprehensive plan for the region. And for those of you here who know me, I love this state. I'm a product of North Carolina. I'm a product of the whole state because I've lived in most of it, and there's not a community in this state I haven't been in. And I've lived in major urban areas, and let's make this an example of the right way to do it. And we need your partnership in helping us do that.
Assuming we're all committed to moving forward, and we do need to find a solution that's advantageous for the entire region, there is no question with the growth that we've all experienced, particularly over the last 30 years. Last question then, and we'll kind of wrap up, is for you guys, to us, at a micro level rather than at the 30,000 foot level, can you tell us what needs to happen or what you anticipate will happen over the next, to advance this over the next 90 days, next 3 months, and for the coming year? What do you want to see happen? Needs to happen?
Well, I'll start, and then I'll ask Paul maybe to specificity, because I oftentimes talk at the 30,000 foot level. It's part of why I'm leading a regional organization. The next steps for us, Senator, and everybody out there, is the kind of the 30, 60, 90-day clip for us is to do, again, more of this. As I mentioned earlier, we are getting more grassroots with this now. We started at the top with a rollout, and then we're going to take the study and do exactly what we're doing this morning to different parts of the region, to Mayor Washam's earlier question, getting and building the buy-in from a regional standpoint. So, my ask, as Paul just said, is really around partnership, and we're not all going to agree on every part of this, but we need to find the common ground, and we need to work towards that and build upon it. Paul, is there anything more tactically you would offer?
No, other than the one thing that my takeaway here, Janet, and I'll say this a little bit, make it a little bit of a working session as we develop partnerships here, is that we truly need to, moving forward, that this is get some representatives from the city to become part of this discussion with us as well, because there's some very legitimate questions that need to be addressed. we've had these conversations. I can honestly say I have done more Zooms on transportation this year than I have done on any political race I've done this far out. It's been an educational experience for me. I do know that they are committed to looking at balance. One big question here that has been raised is not just about the impact on Mecklenburg, but the surrounding counties as well, and how those relationships are developed and built, and what are going to be the needs of those communities. Because, just go across the line over to the Harrisburg, Cabarrus County region and look at what's taking place in the transformation that's there. So this is a much broader discussion. So I see all of us here as an opportunity to, truly be impactful and shape the future, not just for Mecklenburg County, but for the whole region, by just developing an attitude. Let's get the smart minds in the world. And Jeff, I've always told you, you're one of the brighter bulbs ever to go down to Raleigh. And you may say that doesn't mean the bar's that high, but the reality is
I'm not sure there is even a bar if that's the case.
That's right. So you are. And the fact is, we got great partners with UNC Charlotte. We got great partners with NC State. You got Davidson right there, that whole corridor, and we're going to continue to attract a lot of industries and growth industries here. And so we've got to find workable solutions. And I think the one takeaway for everybody that came out of the focus groups and the work, and there's more detail, the executive summary is available, full summaries, the full report is going to be available very shortly. But the one takeaway coming out of the focus groups is very much is having that north-south connection, which is critical. And as a guy who spent more than enough time going across the 2 lanes on Lake Norman, going into Charlotte, it is going to continue to be very critical that we find those solutions.
Well, first of all, I think that's really important is that all the stakeholders have a seat at the table to craft kind of a common vision and direction that we need to head. And first of all, what I want to do is thank all the elected officials that have joined us today, from Davidson, Huntersville, and Cornelius. I mean, these are the guys that have been elected by us to represent us and ensure that we're doing good things in the region and being part of this. So again, I tip my hat for the efforts that you guys do. And I know you don't get nearly compensated how you should and the amount of time and effort. So again, thank all of you. Janet, Paul, and Daniel, it is a tremendous positive to see the talent that's kind of guiding this effort and the expertise that you guys bring. We really are going to lean into you 3 to be advocates for us as well as Charlotte. It is a regional solution. So anybody steps out of it, it's going to cause problems. But again, we got some history that we have to overcome, and we have to find viable solutions that address this, because we're not going to get smaller, as we all know. So and we are obviously very thankful that you guys are engaged in this. You guys have tremendous success and track records in guiding such efforts, and appreciate you taking this much time on a Friday, on a holiday weekend, to spend with all the business leaders here in the Lake Norman region. So again, thank you. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Bill.
Well, Jeff, we got some an outstanding Focus Friday coming up later on this month. You want to share that?
Sure. Just as background, a couple months ago, we had Senator Jeff Jackson, who is a candidate for the U.S. State Senate on. Then last month, we had the CMS Superintendent Ernst Winston, who gave us a tremendous amount of insight into the challenges that CMS will face with COVID raging again with our students and direction. So we appreciate their 2 efforts. This coming month, we will have Congressman Ted Budd will come on board, who's also a candidate for the U.S. Senate, talking about kind of the state of Washington to date. Immediately the following month after that, we'll have North Carolina State Auditor Beth Wood on, and Beth is truly a state treasure. This is one gifted and talented lady, and her office has tremendous implications and impact on our businesses, not only in our region, but statewide. So it'll be a pleasure to have her. I'm working on right now, exchanging text messages with both President Pro Tem Phil Berger, who in the North Carolina Senate, who most people arguably would say is the single most powerful elected official in the state of North Carolina. And then following him, we're looking and trading and trying to figure out calendars for Atrium's corporate CEO, Gene Woods, because Atrium, like Novant, has a tremendous amount of effort and impact in our region up here to share what's going on. The last person which we are going to try to work in, and we're trying to figure out where, is a gentleman by the name of David Snepp. And David has a unique background in that he served for 4 years in the U.S. Embassy representing the State Department under President Obama in the embassy in Kabul. Worked on a lot of the exit strategies and military strategies and policy, direct contact with leaders in Afghanistan, and looking at transition plans between the State Department and the military operations of the country for 4 years. So I think it would be insightful to get his perspective on what's been transpiring with our removal and from Afghanistan. So that's a little bit of what we're doing on the Focus Friday front. So
And that's always on the third Friday at 8:30. Novant Health, Huntersville Medical Center is a sponsor of that. Mike couldn't stay on the line. He had another engagement, so we don't have a healthcare update. We had, in addition to our chamber members, our elected officials, we had a lot of candidates that were engaging in discussion today and making sure that they were enlightened in what we're trying to do. Remind everybody that we've got our candidate forums in October. October the 5th, we have it in Huntersville, the 7th in Cornelius, and the 14th in Davidson. All of those taking place at 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock at the respective town halls. We will be Zooming that information so that people that don't feel comfortable coming to the town halls will try to social distance, because we know probably going into October, we're still going to be dealing with that situation. It is open to the public. People have asked what kind of questions. Well, the questions come from the audience. The chamber always goes with a preset list of questions, but we always defer to questions coming from the audience, and we'll also take some coming over the chat line. So you can look at the chamber's website at lakenormanchamber.org for more information about that. Again, Janet, thank you for your partnership. We really enjoy, as Janet mentioned, we get together fairly regularly, at least every other week, the 17 area chambers of commerce, talking about what's going on in our region, how we can work together and collaborate. And I thank you for your leadership, Janet. Thank you very much, everybody, and have a great Labor Day weekend.